Yeah, so just tell us how you first heard about triathlon and how you got started.
When I started triathlon, I was only 13, and at that point, I was doing swimming for 6 months a year, and then running for the other half a year. And triathlon wasn't a big deal back then, but I decided that when I was swimming, I'd lose all my run fitness, and vice versa. So, heard about this local event put on by the local road running club, and decided to try it just to keep an overall fitness, so the transition wasn't as big an impact. So, and then it just took over as a major sport, and the sport sort of grew and grew, but it was early beginnings back then.
And I mean, you got a ton of achievements. And is there a proudest? Do you have a proudest sort of one of that list of achievements that you've done?
Well, obviously the World Cup wins back in my day were fantastic, because I always wanted to compete on a world circuit, competing for my country as well. So 4 years of being very consistent at racing was fantastic for me. But also the local racing, we had the Grand Prix series here for many years. It was televised on TV as well, and I got to sort of showcase the sport in Australia, and I think that's one of the key successes for Australians coming up and doing very well.
And your nickname is Croc, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
What's the story behind that?
Well, I come from North Queensland, where there are a lot of crocodiles, and I was actually doing a race down south, and someone was talking about my training, and I said that it's so hot up there that I get off the bike, and I used to get off the bike and then jump in the creek and have a bit of a swim, and they said, well, isn't there crocs in there? I said, oh yeah, but they don't bother me and I don't bother them, so it works out quite well. We got a good relationship, but yeah, so that's sort of where it grew from, and where I lived was right on the river, and we had quite a few crocs in the back, down in the creek just near where we lived, so the story grew from there.
And would you be able to identify what the secret of your success has been?
I think my upbringing, I think I started being very active very young, and I think with the sport of triathlon being an endurance sport, I think you've got to have that base, and that's what I came from. So my dad used to tell a story that when I was young, I used to get out he had a cane paddock, business there. So I used to get out in the morning and chase the tractors all morning, go home for lunch, and come back in the afternoon and chase them again. So I was active from day one, and I think that's sort of the difference for me was, really starting an active life quite early.
Now, in respect to, ITU triathlon, you were there right from the beginning. The humble beginnings in Avignon,
Yeah.
It looks like there was 10 people on the start line. What was that experience like?
Oh, Avignon was fantastic. Once again, it was the first time I'd represented my country, and world championships, and there was still a lot of quality athletes there, still a fair few athletes, but I can remember the day. It was one of the hottest races I've ever done still, and they started fairly late. Avignon was, they have the quite windy conditions down there as well, so it was blowing a gale. And it was just fantastic. The nerves obviously were quite horrendous. I was injured as well. I got my bike stolen the week before, and I'd torn a glute, so I wasn't travelling the best, but out to have a good race, and I think I ended up about 4th or 6th or something. So it was sort of the start of my international career.
And then the following year, you guys swept the podium in Orlando. Was that kind of the start of putting Australia on the map as far as
Yeah, it was sort of when we really dominated that sort of era. There was a few of us that were racing quite hard against each other in Australia, and competition like that really brings the best out of you when you travel overseas. And the race in Florida, I was just talking about that recently to someone, and that was a fantastic event. Once again, it was hot conditions, but Greg Welsh and myself, we used to live together in San Diego, and we trained together, so obviously we're sort of working pretty well together. But Florida was a big event for us, a bit of a breakthrough for the three of us actually. So fantastic event, and yeah, it was good start to our career.
In your opinion, why has Australia been successful for so long?
I think Australia's been successful. A lot of conditions, a lot of different reasons, but I think the climate in Australia is very important. Most of the population of Australia live close to the coast, so I think we all learn how to swim, very active in the water, as well as just normal outdoor activities. You ride your bike and obviously you run and that at school. And I think that's got a lot to come into play with why we sort of go on with it. Like I said, endurance sport, you need that good base, those good beginnings. But also, I did my first school triathlon when I was about 15, so that was about 20 years ago. So if you've got those programs and those leading events that different athletes can follow on from to start at the grassroots level, then you're always going to pluck a few champions out of there, a few Olympians, and I think that's got a lot to do it. We've got kids series races here in Australia now, and they're very popular. So I think it's a perfect fit, the sport, for the lifestyle of Australians in general, and that has always worked well for us. And once you get that, those good athletes coming out and those athletes working against each other, being very competitive, they're always going to jump to another level because they're always sort of racing against each other quite hard.
We spoke to Simon Whitfield last year in Sydney. It was a homecoming for him because it was the triathlon's big debut at the Olympics. And he basically credits Australia as part of that, the reason why he was able to come away with that gold medal. Basically because he learned the culture of how to win. In Australia, there's a culture of we don't compromise. You win, and that's just the way it is. Is that something you're aware of in Australia, or that was his take on it, obviously. But is that something you're aware of?
Well, I'm sure it's got a lot to do with it. I think as a nation we're very competitive, and I think just across all sports in general, we do quite well for a small-sized country, a small population of 20 million. So we are very competitive, especially when it comes to the Kiwis. We like to give them a bit of a serve and vice versa. So when I was racing, Hamish Carter was the guy that we used to go head-to-head. So we were always the guys that were trying to win the World Cups, and he's a Kiwi, obviously, so love to have a win over the Kiwis. But definitely Australia is a very competitive country and very sports orientated. Once again, I think because of the way we're brought up and the climate of Australian culture, I guess, the lifestyle, etc.
And just talking about the new series, for a guy like yourself who dominated the sport really for 4 years, you were runner-up at the World Championships, so you essentially win every race except the World Championship Series race. Are you happier with the new format as where you have to win a whole series of races as opposed to a single day?
I think so. I think that's, I can say that because that's what I sort of did well at in my day, but I think it is a more a gauge of the best athletes, how they're travelling for that season. Whereas, the one day, things can go wrong, things can happen. But, it's important to have those world champs, the single day races as well. So I think that's important as well. I just chopped off there to get... Mightn't be able to use that one, would you?
Maybe we can just ask that question.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Yep. I was trying to hurry it up, finish it up, but... I'm all weeping my eyes from the sun.
Sorry.
You're right.
We're almost done.
You're right, no worries.
Okay, yeah, so just, sorry once again. What's your sort of take on a single day race as opposed to a series of races as we're now seeing in the World Championship Series?
I think it's more of a truer sense of how an athlete's travelling if they're more consistent over a whole series of events. That was my goal, especially when you got sponsors and that. It was important for me to try and be up there the whole time. So being consistent, it's very hard to do. And it's still important to have that one day, big event, but the World Championships sort of eluded me because of the fact that it was just a one-day event and things go wrong. I was in a good position a few times there, but like I said, things go wrong sometimes. But I like the whole idea of having a series of events that you can really pluck out the best athlete who's travelling the best for that year.
And what's kind of the biggest change or how evolution of the sport since when you raced?
Well, it's continually changing for me. I've noticed that obviously my early days when, we used to, transition was basically just where the bikes were and people got out of the swim and stripped naked, and great spectator sport, but yeah, that didn't last too long. So it's evolved quite fast. I think it was one of the fastest growing sports in the world. So there's mass appeal, and that's showcased by these Australian events that you have like Mooloolaba. The numbers still go up. Every single year it's just a battle just to try and get in a race, trying to enter a race as an age grouper. So obviously the sport gets faster and faster, and the athletes, you're hoping they're bringing out better athletes as you go along, but it's continually changing. But I think the mass appeal is getting bigger. Obviously the injection of Olympics and that sort of changed a few things. With maybe some of the professionalism might have changed a little bit. With there was a lot more races that had a lot more money in them, but with Olympics, I think there's a lot of people want to go to the Olympics, and to do that, you're racing for points a lot of the days without racing for money. So there's still a lot of money in there, obviously, but and you wouldn't change it all. Olympics was something that I really wanted to go to as well. That was my greatest dream, I guess. So I think the injection of Olympics and representative races like that is the biggest change.
And now you're a coach yourself, and we're seeing now, because people are having to push so hard in the training, we're seeing a lot more injuries and stress fractures.
Yeah.
So what's kind of the secrets to, I guess that's always the challenge. How do you balance training hard enough and not being injured?
Well, I think you've got to give them a good base to start with. I think a lot of the athletes that start the season and just go out hard straight up is always a danger. But if you give them a lot of long, slow mileage that they can get used to the running, the impact of the running, it stops them having stress fractures. But one of the hardest things is to actually hold athletes back, because they can see the carrot at the end there with trying to win races and trying to beat your competitor. But trying to hold them back at certain times is probably the biggest challenge, because they're all so competitive. And that's probably one of the challenges I sort of face. Even with age groupers as well, they're very motivated people, and the sport is obviously a very physical sport. So you're always trying to push the boundaries, just go that little bit harder, try and do better than the guy next to you, and that invariably causes injuries. So I think just holding them back is probably the biggest deal.
And finally, one of your records has stood the test of time. I counted 19 wins, but I think we were saying 17. I don't know what the true number is, but your second closest is Javier Gomez with 12, and Simon Whitfield, I think, has 12 as well. So is that a pretty proud thing for you to still hold on to? Because that'll be a tough thing to match. Yeah,
for sure. It was it was a lot of work for me. There's 4 years of travelling to Russia and China and all over the place, but it's something that I'm proud of, and every now and then I get a mention on the tally, so that's all good as well. But if the guys get close to the 19, I might have to pull the old tri-suit back on and go out there and see if I can get a number 20. So yeah, it's something. I think when you're doing the sport, when you're a professional, you don't want to look back and see what you're doing at the time, but when I retired, I can look back and see what I achieved and be proud of that, and that's something that no one can take away from you. So I think, like I said, when you're travelling, when you're actually on the journey of competing and doing the best you can, you're racing every second weekend or whatever it is, you don't look back or look at what you're doing at the time, but you can look back afterwards.
Great. Thanks very much for your time.
No worries. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Too easy.